Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone, wherever you may be joining us from today. My name is Kate Mills, and I'm joined by my colleague Helena, and we are here to talk about things we wish we knew when we were applying for grants. So Helena and I work in research at Wellcome Trust, where part of our job is to read and process hundreds of grant applications a year. We are both also former academics. So I have a PhD in cancer cell biology, and I also have some postdoctoral experience in developmental biology. I'll pass on to Helena, who will tell you a little bit about herself before we kick things off.
Thanks, Kate. So prior to joining Wellcome, I was based at King's, where I did a PhD in genetics of complex disease, and I've also got some research experience in the NHS and in industry. So today our presentation will be in two halves. Firstly, Kate will discuss how to go about preparing a grant application and give some tips on the art of grantsmanship. And then I will give an overview of the funding that Wellcome currently offers, with a focus on our new early career scheme. At the end, we'll hopefully have time for a short Q&A, and if possible, please ask us questions about the grantsmanship side of the presentation, as any information that we are able to give on our new schemes is available on our website.
Okay, great. Let's get things started then. Hopefully I can move slides. Great. So I thought I would kick off this session with a quote from Jacob Crassier. He is a former professor and was the former director of research grants at the Human Frontiers Science Program. So the art of grantsmanship will unfortunately not turn mediocre science into a fundable grant proposal. However, poor grantsmanship will, and very often does, turn good science into an unfundable proposal. And this is something that unfortunately Helen and I have witnessed many times. So hopefully after the session today, you'll have a few tips and tricks about how to avoid that and how to write a good grant. So one of the key steps in writing a successful grant proposal occurs well before you even start to write your application, and even before you decide where you want to apply. So you really need to put time into planning. So you want to take time to develop a hypothesis that is based on your interests and skills, and then also decide how you're going to test that. If you don't have all the skills you may need to test your hypothesis, you need to figure out how to get them. Especially for early careers grants and early careers programs, we don't actually expect you to have every single skill you may need. So part of the I guess, developmental process is to actually get those skills. So that kind of leads on to my next point. You want to start reaching out as early as possible to your senior colleagues in the field. You want to think about I guess, what kind of mentorship you may need to make your proposal happen. As an early career researcher, you will be need to be hosted by someone in a lab. In fact, you actually may need multiple people to host you, especially if you are working on a multidisciplinary project, or you have very specific expertise or skill that you need to gain. The next step would also be, included in these steps, would be to generate preliminary data in support of your hypothesis. This will not only allow you to identify like whether your project is feasible and your experimental processes are relevant, but you'll also be able to identify any potential pitfalls and potentially figure out how to mitigate those. Okay, so probably the most important thing that I say in this talk is to pick a scheme that suits you and your research project. It's really obvious to us when people try to shoehorn their project into a scheme that is not suitable, and unfortunately those applications don't even make it past the preliminary round. No matter how good the science is, if it's not a good fit scheme, it will not make it through the application process. So how do you find a funder? Probably the best tip I can give you is to talk to your research office. So most grants will go through your research office before they come to us. So they will know what kind of funders and what kind of fellowships people who are at your career stage are applying for. If you're UK based, the UKRI funding finder is a really good place to start. If you're not UK based, I'm sure wherever you are, there is a database or something that is there to compile a list of funders in your area. Otherwise, Google is quite useful. Yeah, so once you've picked a scheme that suits your proposal, really read through the guidance on the website to make sure that you're eligible and that you actually understand the purpose of the scheme. And once you've understood the purpose of the scheme, we are looking for, Wellcome in particular, but I'm sure many funders, we're looking for people who actually are taking advantage of what the scheme offers. So, for example, if we are offering you to be hosted at multiple labs and we're providing the appropriate funds for that, we actually want you to take advantage of that. And back to what I said before, don't try to push your project into a scheme that is not suitable because it will not be successful. The next tip is to understand the assessment process. So that kind of relates to who will be actually reading the application and how will it be assessed. So funders often have the assessment process and the membership of their assessment panels on their website. If you can get an understanding of who will be reading your application, you'll be able to write it accordingly. For example, Wellcome, for our early career schemes in the past, we've used a combination of internal shortlisting, then we've taken it to a panel who have a very, very broad life science based expertise. And then we actually seek out peer reviewers who have expertise very specific to the project being assessed. Yeah, so in addition to all of this, I guess, probably as you would have guessed, you will increase your chances of success if you apply to several funders. That is completely fine. We expect that you will be applying for multiple funders. If you're nervous about whether you can accept a fellowship while still remaining eligible for another, we're always happy to ask. I mean, in general, we're happy to answer any questions. You usually find some kind of contact details on the website, and they're there so that you can ask questions about eligibility, whether your project is fit to scheme, all that kind of stuff. It's better for you because you know what the scheme is about, and it's also better for us because we don't have to, reject unsuccessful applications. So when we assess proposals at Wellcome, we are looking for 3 key elements, and we call them the 3 Ps, that is person, project, and place. So in the very competitive funding landscape, all 3 of these need to be strong for an application to be considered for an award. So I'll go into a little bit more detail in the next few slides about this, because I think they actually do broadly apply to most proposals, regardless of whether you are submitting to Wellcome or elsewhere. So the person, we are looking at track record. So that's, your peer-reviewed original research papers. We also want to see evidence of your achievements and also evidence that you are actively seeking out collaborations. You're taking, an active role in driving your career forward. We also want to see how your research has impacted the field and how it's being disseminated. We also want to know if you have the appropriate expertise to do the research that you propose. As I mentioned before, for early careers grants, we actually don't expect you to have every single skill you need. And part of early career awards are related to development. So if you don't have this expertise, we want to see that you have a clear plan of how you're going to learn this and how you're going to get this expertise. Following on from this, we also want to see how the funding will aid your career development and also your long-term career goals. We want to fund people who are going to be future leaders. So we want to see how you plan to use this funding to move to the next stage of your career. So the next section, project. You need to ensure that your project is novel, innovative, original, focused, and feasible. And as a former academic, I know that sometimes that can feel like a big ask, but we want to see clear intellectual ownership of your project. So we don't want you basically to be doing a traditional postdoc position on another PI's grant. We want to see that this is your research and that you're the one driving it forward. You need to make sure that your experimental plan is clear. So it needs to be obvious what you want to do, how you want to do it, and also why you want to do it. So if you are, picking something, a certain, even like right down to a time point, why have you selected that? Follows on to, we need adequate experimental detail because we need to be able to assess the feasibility of your project. So you need to be, as I said, very clear about how you're going to do the research you propose. This also includes submitting some preliminary data, which might support your theories, and also a risk mitigation plan to address what will happen if your original ideas don't work. Sometimes the most innovative research is very high risk, and that's fine as long as you have a risk mitigation plan in place. So we know that if your ideas don't work, that you have a backup plan and the money is not essentially wasted. I think the next part is hopefully obvious, but it needs to be easy to understand. Like, we need to understand what your grant is. So that goes back to understanding who is reading and assessing it, using plain English, using logical headings and diagrams. One tip that I would give in regards to this is to get someone outside of your field to read, a scientist, but someone outside of your field to read your proposal, to make sure it makes sense to them, because you will be having probably people who have a broad, life science background reading your application, but they may not be in your particular field. Also, you need to cite appropriate studies because we want to make sure that you know where your research fits within the broader research landscape. Place that is where you'll be undertaking your project. So as an early career researcher, you will obviously need to be hosted in another lab. You need to make sure that your sponsor or supervisor can provide you with strong scientific guidance and also has a strong background in research and training. You may also need some additional sponsors where your primary sponsor does not have the expertise. This is, as I said, particularly important if you're doing multidisciplinary work or if you require some specific skills and expertise. It's also a really great opportunity for networking and expanding your research network, which will be useful for your career progression in the long run. Some schemes also, including Wellcome, also require you to have a mentor. Whether it's required by your scheme or not, I think it's really good advice to have someone who is not your supervisor, but who is maybe a career stage above you and can provide you advice about career progression and career development that is separate from the day-to-day research you're doing in the lab. The other thing we want to know is this the right environment for you to undertake your project? So do you actually have access to space and facilities? If you need a specific piece of equipment to do your work, is it there? It's also really useful when we look at if the environment you're in is really nurturing for early career researchers and will help you grow. So even if that's just being in a very collaborative institution, you'll be able to speak to people, you'll be able to network. That kind of leads on to my next point is, are there development opportunities? So will you be able to increase your network? Will you also be able to learn new skills? Another thing which I think is really key, which we actually see a lot, is people who are staying at the institution they've done their PhD or they've done a significant amount of postdoctoral time at. This is obviously not ideal for growing your network. And if you have been at your proposed organization for several years, you really, really need to make it clear why you are staying there or how you can grow while you're still there. I would quickly touch on budgets as well, because I know it can be a really daunting thing to put together. Really, the key piece of advice here is to speak to your research office. They have a whole host of information that I guess I wasn't aware about when I was working in academia. So most applications for funders will go through the research office. So they have to sign off the budget. So they'll be used to preparing budgets. I know often when I query budgets as part of my job, I get sent to the research office to ask them questions. So They do have a whole lot of information, especially if you're applying to a popular funder like Wellcome. They'll probably be able to give you some tips and tricks that are specific to the funder. The other thing is talk to your supervisor and talk to other successful grant holders. They would have had to have prepared budgets as part of their grant application process. Also, if they're located at the same institution as you, they'll be really, really helpful in compiling that budget because they will know, how much things cost. So following on from that, budgets should be realistic and also well justified. We don't actually, it makes no difference to us whether a project is relatively expensive or relatively cheap in regards to whether we fund it, as long as it fits within the limit of the scheme. So if you need it, ask for it. We'd rather you be able to do your research than not, but you will have to justify it, and you'll have to justify every budget line. If you need to provide an estimate, sometimes you can't provide a quote, and that is okay. We at least need a justification of how you arrived at that cost. Scheme pages for awards usually have loads of guidance on what is allowed and what is disallowed. So read that carefully. And if you can't find that information or you're unsure about anything, you can always ask the funder. We are more than happy to help. It really, really cuts down our work time later as well. So win-win. So just a couple of other tips. Really important, read the scheme guidance on the website carefully. A lot of work actually goes into planning these scheme pages. We want to provide you with as much information as possible to write basically an application that we want to receive and we want to fund. So that is probably, as I said, one of the most important things you can do. Talk to everyone in your network, ask for critical feedback from colleagues and other successful grant applicants, as I said, both inside and outside of your field, and start the application process as early as possible so that you can submit well in advance. A lot of funders have sample application forms on the website. You also may need things like ethics approvals and letters of support or quotes from other people, so that could slow the process down. The application will most likely need to go through your research office as well, so it won't be going straight to the funder when you click submit. So I think interview is a little bit out of the scope of this proposal, but I thought I would just touch on it lightly because hopefully after following some of these tips, you will actually get an invite to interview. There is really no substitute for practicing with mock interviews. That is the #1 thing to do. Also, be prepared to justify all elements of your application, including those outside of your work plan. One thing we get in particular is choosing to stay at their current research location. So it may not be directly related to your experimental plan, but we want to know that you've thought about the whole body of work and not just the science. The other thing is to be aware of recent advancements in the field. We want to know that people we fund are aware of where their research fits and also are keeping on top of the literature and kind of are at the cutting edge. If you are unfortunately unsuccessful, my advice would be to take any feedback or advice offered on board. You can ask for feedback. The funder may say no. That's fine. The worst they'll say is no. So take any feedback on board and actually take time to strengthen the proposal. I know it's really tempting to rewrite something within the space of a couple of weeks, but the strongest applicants are the ones who take the time to develop their work and come back even 6 months to a year later with a much, much stronger proposal. I just thought I would summarize the application process here just to kind of recap everything I've said. So really, really do read the guidelines and instructions. They are there because they're kind of describing the person that we want to see in the application that we want to write the initial proposal, obtain comments from your colleagues, really get that critical feedback. And while that's occurring, figure out if you need any letters of support, quotes, ethics approvals. And once you have all of this, revise the proposal and complete the final version. Then seems obvious, but proofread it, get someone else to proofread it. and reread the instructions and make sure that you are keeping in line with all of those. And then the final point is, as I said, submit in advance of the deadline. So I will now switch over to Helena, who will touch on some of the funding for early careers at Wellcome.
Thanks, Kate. So yeah, I'm just going to give an overview of the funding that we currently offer. Next slide, please. So you may be aware that Wellcome recently launched its new strategy, and this has affected the way that we provide our funding support. So there's sort of two branches of our funding support. There's the discovery research, and the aim of this is to drive significant shifts in understanding that lead to improved human health. And this is mostly through our open mode funding schemes, which perhaps you may be interested in applying to. And the second branch is a sort of more directed funding route, which tends to be more translational, which aims to tackle three urgent health challenges, which are mental health, global heating, and infectious disease. Next slide, please. So the first branch, discovery research, is quite a broad sort of funding area. The remits include biomedical science, population health, product development and applied research, humanities and social science, public engagement and creative industries. So if you work within any of those remits, you may be eligible to apply for one of our new 3 schemes. And these are the Wellcome Early Career Award, the Wellcome Career Development Award, and the Wellcome Discovery Award. Next slide, please. So these schemes will be launching later this year, and the Early Career Award is for early career researchers who are ready to develop their research identity. The Career Development Awards will be for more mid-career researchers who have the potential to be international research leaders, and these are people who are kind of embarking on their independent careers. And then we have the Wellcome Discovery Awards, which are more aimed at established researchers and PIs and teams who want to pursue bold and creative research ideas. Next slide, please. So for all 3 of these awards, to be eligible, you must be based in the UK, the Republic of Ireland, or a low or middle income country. And if you're not sure whether you slot into that eligibility criteria, on our website, you can see a list of eligible low and middle income countries. And those applying as part of the team in one of the Discovery Awards can be based anywhere. All 3 of the awards will be open to career re-entry, so if you've had a break from research, you can come back and apply, or to those who wish to undertake their research part-time. If you're familiar with our current schemes, which are coming to an end and closing this year, you might wonder how our new schemes sort of relate to those. And essentially, we've kind of simplified our schemes, so now there's only going to be 3, and we sort of condensed them so that different types of disciplines, career stages, and people from different locations around the world can apply to the same schemes. So previously we had separate schemes for clinicians or for international applicants, for example, and now all of those individuals will be eligible to apply for these 3 schemes. Another change that we've implemented is to sort of bring about greater flexibility by increasing the duration of some of the schemes that we offer. And this is to sort of with the aim of giving individuals more freedom to pursue innovative and broad research. There's also going to be a bit of a shift in the balance to the support we provide. So as you can see, we provide support to those who are just starting out in their research career and to established world leaders, but we're hoping to give slightly more support to those who are earlier on in their careers. Next slide, please. So based on the audience here today, I'm going to give a little bit more information about the Early Career Award that we'll be offering. So this scheme will provide funding for early career researchers from any discipline in that list that I mentioned who are ready to develop their research identity. And it's expected that through an innovative project, you'll be able to deliver shifts in understanding that can improve human life, health and well-being. So you can be working in any one of those remits that I've listed, but your sort of end goal must be to kind of work towards improving human life, health and well-being. You'll be expected to design, plan and deliver the research project. So this relates back to what Kate was saying about having intellectual ownership of your project. So this isn't sort of regular postdoc project for an early career. This is really taking ownership of your work, developing your niche. And in that, you'll be expected to develop links with other researchers and build collaborations and a network within your field, so that by the end of the award, hopefully you'll be ready to lead your own independent research program. So if you're compiling an application for this scheme, you should be really trying to think of your sort of longer term aims, what you can gain during this period of time to kind of reach independence for your next step. Next slide, please, Kate. So to be eligible for this award, you'll need to be an early career researcher, which means at the point that you submit your application, you should have completed a substantive period of research training relevant to your discipline. So I think most of the audience here will sort of fall into the life sciences. So in that discipline, we expect you to have a PhD before applying, and you may have some limited postdoctoral experience. We're expecting to see no more than 3 years of postdoc experience at this stage, but obviously individual circumstances differ and you may still be competitive. But essentially you should be able to demonstrate a good understanding of research methodology, evidence of project delivery and analysis. So from your application form, we need to be convinced that you'll be able to deliver your project. As I mentioned, the host organisation must be in the UK, Republic of Ireland or a lower middle income country, and we have separate arrangements for India and China. For this award, you'll also need to have a sponsor at your host organisation. So although you'll be sort of developing your own project and sort of pursuing your own niche, you'll still be based in someone's group. You'll need to have a bit of support and training around you. So you'll need a sponsor at your host organisation and perhaps a sponsor and supervisor if you plan to spend some time elsewhere, gaining skills or doing some training. And as Kate mentioned, you also need to identify a mentor, and they should be someone who's separate from your group or your work, but someone who can provide some sort of advice about your general career and how to get to the next stage. Next slide, please. So for this award, Wellcome will provide your salary and research expenses up to £400,000, and the award will run for up to 5 years in duration. So that could sound quite intimidating for an early career award. If you've never costed a grant before, £400,000 is quite a bit of money. So as Kate mentioned earlier, it's really crucial that you seek advice from your research office, from your current PI, from your sponsor, from anyone in your lab, and just try and remember that the sort of guidance that we give there won't sort of fit every project. So for example, if you're going to use a lot of animals, your project might be more expensive than someone who's doing computational work. So it's just really important that you justify the needs for what you've asked for, and also ask someone once you've drafted the budget to have a read through, see if it's realistic. Examples of the allowed research expenses could be materials and consumables, travel, for example, to go to conferences or visit collaborators, access charges for equipment that you might need to use, animals, overseas allowances if applicable, any fieldwork expenses that you might incur. So there can be quite a bit to think about. Next slide, please, Kate. So if that sounds like it might suit you at your career stage, I'll talk a little bit about the application and assessment process. So for all 3 of our schemes, there'll be 3 rounds per year. So there'll be 3 points in time where you can submit an application to us. And the assessment criteria is common across all 3 schemes largely. So this relates back to what Kate was saying about the project person and place. So we'll be assessing your proposal, we'll be assessing you as an applicant, your outputs, your track record, and also your research environment. So how will your research environment enable you to gain that network, those skills that you'll need to take the next step? On the right is a timeline of the first round of our new schemes. So currently on our website, you can read about all of the information, you can have a look and see whether you think it might be the type of support that you need. If it is, the application forms will open online in August, and the first application deadline will be in November. The funding decision from that deadline will be released next May. And at the bottom, you can see the sort of timeline of things that will happen between submission in November and the decisions being released in May. So once you submit your application, it will first be shortlisted by a subject area panel. So this will be experts in your field who will review your application. If it's successful at that stage, it will be sent out for expert written review. And at this stage, Wellcome will identify suitable individuals in your field to provide written comments on your application. You'll then be invited to attend an interview, and this will be with a slightly broader panel of experts, and they will have the notes from your shortlisting panel and the written review from the experts in your field. If you're successful at the interview stage, you may be offered the award, and if not, you'll be provided with some feedback, which as Kate mentioned earlier, hopefully could be really helpful for either improving your application to apply for Wellcome, another Wellcome scheme, or perhaps applying elsewhere. Next slide, please, Kate. So a lot of information on our schemes can be found on our website. So if you head to wellcome.org/grant-funding, you can have a look at the Early Career Awards, the Career Development Awards, and the Discovery Awards. You can see the timelines there and with the information about eligibility, costs, what's expected of your host organisation. Final details are still being released for our schemes, and they will be obviously available on our website before the applications open in August. If you're not sure whether this funding suits you and your project, or you don't really know where to start, as Kate mentioned earlier, the Medical Research Council have a really good interactive tool on their website where you can see the different sort of funding bodies in the UK, what they have on offer at different career stages. So if you go to the UKRI website and look for that, that's quite a good place to start. I think we might have time for a few questions. Any questions you have about our schemes, please head over to our website, as all of the information that we are able to give is listed there. But if you have any questions about grantsmanship, then we welcome them now. Just bring up the Q&A.
I can't see any questions. Ah, great. There are some questions on the early careers scheme, which I am going to leave for the moment because all the information we can give is on our website. There is one question about how would publication gaps resulting from COVID-19 pandemic impact how early career researchers are assessed for Wellcome fellowships. So we've actually taken that into consideration for all of our fellowships and all of our awards going forward. There is an option, obviously this is, the pandemic is fairly worldwide, research has stagnated everywhere. There is a section where you can always include any career breaks you've taken, and that can include disruption because of the COVID-19 pandemic, or very importantly, any career breaks you've taken for illness, for family reasons, for caring duty, all of that kind of stuff. So that is really important to make clear in your application. I think this question, I'm not sure if I understand it, but I think it is a useful one to ask if I do understand it right. Maybe Helena can answer it. What is the best time to apply for a grant that is all year round?
Yes, so there isn't really a best time. I'd say all year is competitive. It's essentially when would your application and your proposal be most competitive? So for example, if your new proposal is based on some work that you've just done and it's not quite published yet, it might be best to wait until that's published, or if you have a preprint up, then the sort of reviewing panel can see that your data and what the sort of basis of your application is based on. So really the best time is the best time for you and your project.
Yeah, I would say exactly that too. And if you have just finished a PhD, like make sure that your publications are out there. You can also drop your publications on bioRxiv if they're in the review process still, just so we can see that you have the information there, and especially if you have some preliminary data on there which might support your application, but it doesn't fit within the scheme limits, just so the reviewers can look there if they want to. Helena, can you see anything else that might be useful to answer?
So some funders usually ask if you've submitted your proposal elsewhere, why is this? I can't speak for all funders, but we usually ask that so that we can sort of that won't disadvantage you at all, but we just keep a track of that, because if you're offered another award, obviously we will, and you accept it, will take you out of our application process. You can't hold sort of two equivalent awards at the same time. So it's basically just to ensure that we're kind of keeping on top of your eligibility. So is over 3 years postdoc research a disadvantage for the early career award? There's a bit more information about this on our website. It's not necessarily, but it may be that you, depending on your circumstances, you may be better to wait a little bit and apply for the next sort of level up if you be competitive for that soon. So not all of our schemes will be suitable for everyone at every stage in their career. So you might sort of find that you're between stages, but also we understand that individuals have different circumstances and different career trajectories. So that's why we don't have a sort of limit on 3 years. You may well still be competitive for the scheme.
And I'll probably just add to that in that the 3 years is definitely not a hard line. It is a guidance. We have to give some guidance, otherwise people will be coming in with 10 years postdoctoral experience when they're clearly not suitable. One example that we commonly give is if you've had a drastic change of field. So you may have 4 or 5 years postdoctoral experience, but in that time you have shifted from something like very mathematical, computational based to life sciences. And that is something we would consider you are more probably at that career stage more appropriate for early career than starting to lead your own research group. There is one more question which I'll just quickly address. It is about, I said at the beginning of my talk that if you're staying at the same organization and you need to justify that. And there was a question about not wanting to uproot your family, and that's fair enough. We still need to see some evidence of you trying to grow and develop. So even if that's moving to another university within the same city or within the same area, it could even be like changing departments or working collaboratively with researchers outside your the department you're already in. So it's not, we're not expecting that everyone has the opportunity to move abroad, but there are still options of ways that you can grow yourself while staying in the same place or a similar area. I think that's probably all I can see. And there's a whole lot of questions about eligibility regarding certain countries. As Helena said, there is a list on our website for what we classify as lower and middle income countries. And there's also an arrangement, I've got a question from India. We have an arrangement with funding in India that you can access if you just have a look on the website. But I think that's probably it, and probably all we have time for. So in that case, hope everyone has a great rest of the day and great conference.